Welcome back to the Williams Real Estate Channel. I'm your host, Geordie Williams, and today we are discussing Townsville. I'm seeing a lot of it these days, people getting sucked into the FOMO. So I thought I better put some content out there to explain my thoughts around Townsville. Is it too late? Is it a good investment? Well, you can make that decision for yourself after this video. Before we get into Townsville and some data and some key suburbs that a lot of people are buying in these days, we'll run through briefly recap on the 18-year land cycle as we use this as a framework to work out when is it a good time to enter each market, as we use history, as history doesn't repeat but it rhymes, and it gives us a good indication of how a market is performing now and potentially in the future, as we are currently sitting in the market in an equivalent point of the cycle than 2005. Couple of years, there's probably a year and a half to 2 years before we reach the peak of the market in 2026. Similar point of the cycle, 2007 peak market, before we will then enter the next land-driven downturn. It'll be labeled something. We'll wait and see what the name is for it, but the last was the 2008 GFC global financial crisis. So if you recall that downturn, we are about 2 years away from the next downturn. So this is why we use this framework to work out which is the best market to buy in, which will perform from 2005 and onwards, and which markets are no longer the best pick based off history, based off how they performed historically, and how we can then use that to correlate how they will perform moving forward using the framework and historical sales data. So keep this framework in mind as we look through these future slides. We are in a similar point of the cycle of 2005. So look what happened between 2005 and onwards. Will give you an indication of where Townsville and these key suburbs, we're going to dig right down into a few suburbs, will be performing in the years ahead. So without further ado, let's get onto the first one. First one is, first off the bat is Mount Louisa, if I pronounce that right, but this is, just so I can show you on the map, towards northwest of Townsville, pretty close into the main district area of Townsville, hooked up with all the key schools. And if we just look at the last 12 months, it's all green, going gangbusters. Days on market are very low, less than 15 days on market. Everything's flying out the door within a week or so. So that's not the best indication of when's a good time to get into the market. I mean, some people like getting in markets when they're going booming, but for us, that's not for us. We like to get into markets after their protracted period. So the ideal time to enter Townsville would have been around 2018, 2019, 2020, before it started this growth run. But as you can see, over the last couple of years, from 2021 and onwards, in Mount Louisa, it is away at the races. And will continue to do so based off history. As I said, we are in a similar point of the cycle of 2005. So from 2005, 6, 7, it still went strong until the market topped out in 2007 at $403,000 for the medium house price for this area. So it then topped out. So as you can see, there's a good solid 3 years worth of growth can be expected for this suburb. So if we roughly add it up, it is 50, 60 odd percent we can expect to see from this suburb over the next 3 years. But once the market tops out in, say, 2027, it will then switch off like what happened in history and go backwards for many years, a good 15 years. So if you bought at today's rate and you hold a house at today's rate, the median house price is low 600s. But based off history, if you bought it today, you can expect over the next 15 years to receive, we can run some numbers for you. So it's not looking great. So in 2019, 355,000 medium house price, minus if you bought it in 2005, 291,000, 64,000 capital growth over 15 years, which is pretty terrible. Divided by 291,000 in 2005. Sorry, let's try that again. So 355 minus 291 equals 64, divided by 291 equals 21 or 22%. So I'm using my laptop here. 22% growth if you bought a house based off history, based off using the 18-year land cycle. If you bought a house today in this market, you can expect over the next 15 years to only receive 20 odd percent. Yes, you'll get a good 50, 60% over the next couple of years based off history, but it'll switch off and go backwards. So this is definitely not a market we are looking to buy in and do not suggest buying in. So hopefully this video will provide people clarity and whether or not they should buy and get sucked into the herd right now in Townsville. What's the next one? We've got Hyde Park. So for those that don't know Hyde Park, it's a little bit further closer into the CBD of Townsville City. So I guess you could say it's a more desirable location, potentially. Again, it's been away at the races, days on market. Everything's pretty much less than 20, the last couple of months, everything looks like it's been flying out the door within a week or so, which is not a great sign when you're going to buy. It's good once you bought the property and are holding it in its growth run, but not a good time to be buying in a market that's that hot. As you can see, it's going gangbusters. Best time to buy in this suburb, again, would have been around 2019, 2020 before it started its growth run. It will continue to have a growth run and a good couple of years ahead. So 2 to 3 years. Let's have a look. So over the next, in 2005, 6, 7, which will be the equivalent of 2025, 2026, 2027, we can expect Hyde Park in Townsville to receive 50, 60% growth. But then again, the market will switch off and go through another protracted, stagnant, negative growth period for another good 10 years. So if you bought at today's rate at the 500,000, bit over 500,000, the median price would have been equivalent market in 2005. Let's see how you will perform over a 15-year horizon. 314 in 2019 minus 269,000 in 2005 divided by 269 times 100. 16% capital growth over the next 15 years. So again, this is not a suburb we suggest to buy in. Yes, it is in the midst of a boom, but that is not necessarily the markets you want to get into. You want to get into markets after their protracted period and not through a significant bull run. As yes, you will get a good 50, 60% growth over the next 2 to 3 years, but the market will switch off at some point, like what happened in history between 2008 and 2019. And whether or not you want to buy something today and hold it for the long term, this is not a long-term investment play. You may want to trade, may want to buy now and sell at the peak. We don't suggest doing that either. You might as well go to the casino and play some roulette. But if you're looking to buy an asset that will perform stable consistently over long term, Townsville is definitely not looking like the best area to invest in. Where have we got now? Idalia, if I've pronounced that right. So this suburb, let's see where it's at on the map. Getting, I mean, it's slightly southwest of the CBD in Townsville. Got all the school catchments. Looks like it's a somewhat desirable area. Everything's flying out the door within 2 weeks. Pretty strong growth over the last year or so. As you can see on the 20 years of house price sales data, it is away at the races, nearly going vertical. That's never a good sign when buying. Good sign once you're already holding that market, but not a good time to buying in. And based off history, we're in 2005, equivalent market based off the 18-year land cycle. And we have, again, another couple of strong years ahead. So you can expect in this suburb 1950, 60, 70% growth until 2027, but then it'll switch off and again go through another protracted period. So if you bought it today in 2025, let's see what the next 15 years would look like. So let's start again. 373. It's getting pretty thin now, pretty lean. So if you bought in 2005 and held it for 15 years, you would have seen 36,000% capital growth by the time it peaked and then went through it to its trough, divided by 337,000 in 2005, 10% growth over 15 years. That's pretty bad. I times it by 100, divided by 10 times 100, 10% growth. Again, not a suburb we suggest to buy in. Yes, you may get another couple of years of growth in this suburb based off history, but it is reaching its limits and it has a significant trough that it could head towards based off history. Study history, it'll paint a picture of where we're heading in the future. Where are we going next? Anandale. Anandale, let's see where Anandale is on the map. It's a little bit further west of the coast, southwest of the CBD in in Townsville. Again, solid last couple of years, strong growth. That is extraordinary growth, near vertical, going gangbusters, as you can see. Started its growth run in 2021, leveled out a bit over 22 and 3, and then has just gone gangbusters in 2024. So that's never a good sign to enter a market when it's going that strongly. Based off history, it will continue to go strong for the next 2 to 3 years, as what happened in 2005, 6, and 7. But the steam looks like it is slowing, and it would more so slow once it sort of gets that vertical. The steam will definitely slow down, but you can expect over the next 2 to 3 years, 35, 40% growth in Anandale, in Townsville. However, once we hit the peak of the market in 2027, 26, 27, it'll switch off like what it did. And if you bought today in Anandale, it would be like buying in 2005 and you held it for 15 years, you'll pretty much make next to no growth, 20 grand. So that's not even 5%. So would you like to buy a property, hold it for 15 odd years with no growth? I wouldn't like to do so. So some of the cash flow cuckoos are suggesting continue to buy in these markets because they've got supposed good yields, but If you're not studying the 18-year land cycle and historical sales data like we do, you are only going to buy yourself a dud investment and you're going to be holding it for many years with next to no growth. Lucky last. Mundingburra. Where are we at now on the map in Townsville? So this is probably just a few suburbs west of the main CBD in Townsville. Again, solid growth over the last couple of years. As you can also see on the 20 years of sales data, she's away at the races. But these graphs are all looking pretty correlated. Yes, they have some suburbs are performing stronger than others, but more or less the same pattern. And if you bought in this suburb now and held it for 15 years, again, you would probably make next to no growth. So yes, over the next 2 to 3 years, you'll probably receive 50% growth, as what happened in 2005, 6, and 7. But once the market hit its limits and switched off through the land-driven downturn in 2008, which will be around 2027 to 2028, this market will switch off and go through a solid 10 years of negative growth. So if you bought it today, you could expect to make next to nothing over the next 13 to 14 years. So it's reaching its limits. Yes, it has a little bit more in the tank, but look at the trough. You look at history, we're in 2005, and its trough is only probably 10 to 20% higher of where it is now. So if you bought it now, you can expect to have a little bit 50%, 60% growth over the next couple of years, but then it'll hit its limits and then go through a protracted 10 years of negative growth and be pretty much right back where you landed. So whether or not that's a good asset to invest in, I'm sure you can make that decision for yourself. But for us, we're definitely not buying in Townsville. It is not a market we suggest to buy in, as it is reaching its limits, and we'll rather sow our seeds in markets that are set for their next growth cycle right from the start for the next 10 to 15 years ahead, and not get in two markets towards the tail end of their growth cycle, like what most people like to do. Everyone gets sucked into the FOMO, the fear of missing out, the belief that these markets are cheap. People look at it and say, well, it's only 500,000 for a house. You have to look at every market in isolation. You can't compare it to Brisbane. You can't compare it to Sydney. You can't compare it to Melbourne. You can't compare it to other markets because they're not. Every market has to be looked at on its own merits, its own growth run, its own historical growth rates, and not be compared to a completely different market. That's like comparing apples with oranges. You need to compare it with its own market, how it's performed historically, and it would not just continue to keep growing year on year for the rest of its days, 20, 30, 40% growth, strong bull runs. They go through periods, typically markets go through periods of 10 to 13, 14 years of negative to stagnant growth, and then they go through significant bull runs, like what you can see here, for a good solid 8 to 9, 10 years as well. So that's why we like getting into markets after they've gone through the protracted growth period. After they've gone through the protracted stagnant negative growth period, before they go through their bull run. Anyway, hopefully that helped. Hopefully that helped people not get caught up in all the fuss around Townsville. It is definitely not a market we suggest buying in. It is starting to reach its limits. Over the next couple of years, year or two, it will then switch off and go through a significant downturn once the market turns come 2027. If you want help buying a property with stable, consistent long-term growth, hit us up today. We are not buying in these markets, but there are markets that are set for their growth run. Stay tuned. I'll be running some future reports to show you where markets are to be found with solid, sustainable, long-term growth that won't have this boom bust growth runs. So then you can build a solid residential foundation portfolio that is self-sufficient and sustainable over the long term. Until next time, thanks for watching. See you then.